So, speaking of time, I have 15 minutes and 30 slides, so let's get into it. The first thing, questions. If there's something that relates to what I'm talking about, please ask it. I am not infallible, as you will learn. If you're thinking something, other people will be thinking it, and we want everyone to get something out of it, so please ask questions. This is about 2/3 decentralizing democracy, about 1/3 Flux, and I wanted to mention that I don't like the term decentralizing democracy because it's explanationless, which is a thing that we're going to come into very soon. And yeah, that it focuses on an outcome without an explanation. So, let's get into it. Let's experiment with decentralizing democracy. First thing, we've got a plan. Once per week, we're going to ask a random voter about an issue, or once per day. We're going to ask a random voter about an issue, and then we'll ask another random voter about how to solve it. Sweet, we're done! We've decentralized democracy. This is the most decentralized form of democracy you could possibly find, and yet we all expect it to be absolutely terrible. And so there's no reason that just decentralizing democracy for the sake of it would ever offer good results. We need something that's a lot deeper than that, and that is what this talk is about. So essentially, what I'm saying here is that we can't do good things without high-quality explanations. Is that when we build a system like this, the explanations that we use that inform us of how it should be built need to be robust. This is a pretty big problem in pro-democracy or pro-reform democracy groups at the moment, in that they don't have these sort of very deep explanations. And we know that because their systems of democracy look exactly like the old systems of democracy, except they're on a blockchain. And now it's decentralized. So essentially, most of the suggestions out there are either explanationless or use refuted explanations. That's my claim, at least. And we're going to go through some of those in this talk. And essentially, what this means is that we have to really understand the problem that we're trying to solve and use the best explanations that we have access to if we want to actually solve them for good. You know, if you like, easy example off the top of your head, if you have a cancer that's metastasized and you remove the biggest tumor, then that's great, you might live a bit longer, but you're still going to succumb to that eventually, right? If you want to actually survive in that case, you need a much better explanation about what you need to do to not die. And what I propose is that I'm going to suggest the introduction to such an explanation. But to do that, and to understand why some explanations can be high quality and why some can be low quality and things like that, we have to look at a bit of epistemology. So to start with, most people, and I include pretty much everyone here in that, unless you've read The Beginning of Infinity, as I'll touch on at the end, most people are really bad at critical thinking because they've never studied it. As in, to actually understand why some ideas are correct and why some ideas aren't, is not only something that is incredibly, abstract, and so requires a lot of thought, but it also, there's something that we just didn't have access to before about 1940, when Karl Popper really started, producing a lot of philosophical writing. So it's not something that if you go into philosophy that comes before that, you've got justified true belief, all that sort of stuff, that's way up. The main thing, if you take one thing away from this talk, then, in terms of epistemology, ideas and explanations are either refuted or non-refuted. There's no middle ground. There is no middle ground. And essentially, the amount of evidence has nothing to do with whether an explanation is correct or not. Right? Newton's theory of gravity still has a literal shit ton of evidence. But it's wrong, and we know it's wrong, and we understand why it's wrong because we now understand general relativity. Before that, it was the best guess we had, and we were very justified in following its advice. But once we came up with a better idea, we needed to move on to that better idea. So essentially, if we want to solve problems, we need to seek solutions to those problems, and we have to be okay with finding solutions that we don't like. And there's no reason that our preference for a solution has anything to do with whether it's true or not. Right, this is a really deep point that I think most people don't really internalize yet, is that what we think about the world, what we want to feel, literally has no connection to what the truth is. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we're going to keep making systems of democracy that are still broken in the same ways. And unless we acknowledge, the best knowledge that we have about it and use that to construct a better system, we're going to make the same mistakes. So, objective truth exists. I'm not going to go into it here, but there's a good resource I look at the end. We can get closer to the objective truth, so we can't access objective truth directly, but we can get closer to it, and the way we do that is through improving our explanations of the world. So there's no such thing as like a perfect explanation. Every explanation has a problem. It's not exactly the way reality works, but we can make them better. And if we want solutions to any problems that we ultimately perceive, we have to focus on the explanations that give us an understanding to that problem, and again, we don't get to choose how those things form. At the end of the day, if we have poor explanations, we're not going to be able to solve problems, or at the very least, we can sometimes, like with a bad explanation, we can sometimes partly solve the problem, as I'll look at in a minute, but you can't create an enduring solution. So where democracy comes in. So if we want democracy to solve problems, then it can't be about the will of the people. As if you want democracy to be about the will of the people, that's fine, but you have to understand that it doesn't solve problems then, it just does what people want. Now there's a technicality here, which is that if everyone was a really amazing fallibilist and knew everything in the world, then we could maybe unify the two, but that's not a reality that really matters. Or is it all possible? So here on the left, the right, is essentially how this breaks down. So we have, on the left, we have what people want. On the right, we have solutions to problems. And there's only a very small intersection in between. And particularly here, all of the things that people want that aren't solutions are essentially mistakes that we could have avoided had we been less, I guess, egotistical about the solutions we chose. And everything on the right, in that green, is solutions that we didn't use that we already had. And in the middle is the very slow progress, which I think is one of the things that's frustrating to most people about democracy today. So we can't unify these two, but we can get closer. And so we create a system that produces better solutions or biases better solutions, right? Then we can maximize that overlap. And I think that's really important, is we need to know that the solution, whatever system of democracy we create, it has to relate very deeply with the idea of epistemology and the idea of coming up with solutions to problems. So, explanationless democracies, or democracies which use refuted explanations, can easily decentralize democracy, but it doesn't at all guarantee that democracy will be good, is, I guess, the takeaway from that section. Just to get an idea, who's heard of Lawrence Lessig? Is that Creative Commons? He ran for president. We've got like 6 people. Okay, well, I guess this isn't the Creative Commons meetup, so that's fair enough. Lawrence Lessig is a lawyer and academic in the US. He has a lot of good ideas. Creative Commons is great. He's worked on a number of different projects across the internet, and he recently ran for president. Now, he wants to remove corruption by removing money. Essentially, I'm simplifying a bit, but that's essentially it. And there's this thesis that he has that money and influence corrupts politics. Now, I don't disagree with that. It seems a reasonably fair statement. And his solution is to reform campaign financing and improve voter access. Now, that doesn't, I'm going to go through and criticize this. I don't think that these are bad things, but as we'll find out, I don't think they solve the problem. So, here's a quote from an article that he wrote in the Rolling Stone. So, the great threat today is instead in plain sight. All right, there's some pretext that I also didn't include. It is the economy of influence now, transparent to all, which has normalized a process that draws our democracy away from the will of the people. And I've emphasized that because that is a massive red flag right there, for reasons that we've already discussed. This is from essentially a summary, but it's quite good. He ran on a platform of electoral reform. His proposed Citizen Equality Act outlined a plan to fix gerrymandering, protect voting rights, and reduce the power of big money in politics. Now, these are all good ideas. None of that I disagree with, as in, I think that's probably a good thing to implement, and it probably will help in some way, because we can observe that it helps in other countries, but those countries still have corruption. And so obviously, it doesn't solve the problem. And this is because Lessig, at least in this form, I don't know actually what he thinks, inside his own head, but in terms of what he's published, it doesn't seem that he actually understands where corruption comes from. And so if you're interested in figuring out how to solve the problem of corruption, we need a deeper understanding. And essentially, his explanation, or the implicit explanation is, in what I've just shown you, is refuted with better explanations. So, understanding corruption. I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly because I can spend a lot of time on it. There's a link at the end to a fantastic 20-minute video that I encourage you to watch if you're interested. This is something called the Selector Impurity. And basically, it talks about a ruler, the guy at the top. And the number one job of the ruler is to stay being the ruler. Now, I think this is fairly straightforward. If you stop being the ruler, then you can't do anything. So, obviously, you want to keep doing it. And essentially, the first thing that they need to do is make sure that they have the support of the people that could possibly remove it. Now, regardless of what society we live in, there are power structures, there are other things, there are people who have more power and influence than everyone else, and you want them on your side. If they're not on your side, then they're going to attack you, and of course, being the ruler, you're like essentially the most vulnerable person, or at least not the biggest target. So the second rule of the Selector theory is to use the treasure to buy and maintain power. In a dictatorship, this is quite straightforward. You use like gold or oil or things like that, bribery, whatever. In a democracy, it becomes a bit more complex. Rule 3 is to minimize the keys, and essentially that way you can maximize the reward for each key. That's how you maintain a very stable power base. The treasure in this case is legislative influence. It's things like government contracts, it's influence, it's all that sort of stuff. All the things that we hear about where it's not actual money changing hands, but it doesn't necessarily feel right. So democratic leaders still need to be corrupt, whether they want to be or not, because if they're not, someone else will be. And this is a reality of every power structure, right? The keys themselves are in themselves a small power structure, right? You can think about like strata boards or deans of universities, everything like that all apply, these rules all apply because they are rules of power. And if we are looking to understand the system of democracy and understand corruption, then we need to engage with power in a very deep way. Yeah, if they try not to be corrupt, if they try to be altruistic, someone else will win the key, support, take power, usurp them, that sort of thing. So corruption exists because power acts on rulers, not the other way around. Right, now rulers can wield power, that's fine, but this is a point that most people don't consider. And so if you're constructing a system of democracy, you need to be aware that whatever you're constructing, if you're like essentially giving authority to someone based on some criterion, then that is going to affect them. And so if you want good policy and if you want to solve problems, right, this is essentially the first problem you need to deal with. Corruption, in a democracy, corruption is a tool. And that is something that is probably the biggest takeaway from the Selector theory is corruption is a tool, and if you let people wield it, they have to wield it. Now, corruption in this case is enabled by essentially an unbridled authority. And so, as we'll see, this has to do with the very nature of having a democracy at all, and the way that we construct that. I give a long, like an hour-long lecture that if you want to know more about that, you can look there. And basically, the main part of this solution is that we have to be able to remove this authority, or at least this form of authority, because without doing that, we're definitely not going to be able to solve all of those other issues we just covered. Lessig doesn't acknowledge this, and so his solution can never fully work. Right, now that doesn't mean you shouldn't support him in his presidential run if you happen to be able to vote for him, but we need to be aware that there are lots of intelligent people with good ideas and good hearts that are going to be totally ineffective if they get their way. And it's because of mistakes like this. So, on to democracy. I'm jumping the gun. Usually I go through a bit of a motion before I introduce the term static majoritarianism. But static majoritarianism is pretty straightforward. If the set of voters is the same all the time, and you have a majoritarian system, then that's static majoritarianism. So if we all took a vote now about whose favorite fruit it is, and then we took a vote about what we should do Wednesday, we're in a static majoritarian system. Now, here, it's obviously, we're not, playing for sheep station, so it's okay. But in a democracy, we are, and that's really important. And particularly, in a static majoritarianism democracy, the optimum strategy in every one is to become the biggest bloc, is to be the biggest group of voters. And if you are the biggest group of voters, say you're over 50%, then you alone have the decision-making power. And those other 49.9% of people have no decision-making power. Static majoritarianism enables corruption through this idea of consistent and exclusive rights to power. I feel like I've covered that. It exists in direct democracy. An example of an organisation, online direct democracy. They operate out of Queensland, they run Australian federal things. Liquid democracy, like Democracy Earth, still static majoritarian. You delegate to people and things like that, that's nice, there's a little bit of specialization, but the set of voters is always the same issue to issue. There's representative democracy, which is of course what we have now. And then there's ideas like tiered councils and experts. There's an organisation down in Melbourne called LIBO that is trying to do this sort of thing. And the problem with all of these systems is static majoritarianism. And so without changing the set of voters that participate in each issue, we have no chance to eliminate the sort of authority that leads to corruption. And even if we take measures against each instance of corruption, which we can do, we will always have more instances of corruption with which to fight. So, over here on the right is, I think I have another, yeah, there we go. Okay, so over here on the right, this is essentially what we actually have, right? So I say none of the old ways can solve the problems of corruption, and what we have is actually on the right. It wasn't the diagram I showed you before. If some of you might be aware of a Princeton study in 2014, I think, that correlated about 50 years of voter opinion data against the results of Congress in the states, and they found that the correlation between how average voters felt about the policy that was passed had literally nothing to do with the policy that was passed. However, if you correlated the opinion of economic elites instead, then you had this really nice linear line. And so what we see is that the policy we enact is not even the will of the people, it's not what people want, and it's not solutions to problems. There is some overlap there, so we still get some progress, and sometimes people are happy with the solution without actually implementing a real solution. But I think this is a pretty big problem. So, now on to Flux. That's a bit of an overview of the problem. This is how we deal with it. So the first thing is we start with a direct democracy. This is not for the main reason that people would start with this. This is because the source of new knowledge is unpredictable. And that's just a really, I guess it's quite profound, but if you could predict the next source of new knowledge with great accuracy, then essentially that prediction would be the discovery in and of itself. And so if we're talking about really novel ideas, then you can't exclude anyone because you don't know who to exclude or who to include. We build a system on top of that then biases better explanations and thus better solutions. Now, the actual mechanics of that are a bit too long for this talk, but I encourage you to look into it more if you're interested. Essentially, we use slide after this. So, Flux is a proxy party for a new system of democracy. Essentially, this system of democracy is called issue-based direct democracy. So, basically, over the past 18 months, we've developed this. Candidates are elected as a pass-through. It's pretty straightforward. They just vote however the system comes out. So, issue-based direct democracy, the more interesting slide. We use a very well-crafted and very particular economic system, closed off from any other economic system, that creates opportunity cost between issues. And that's really the significant point there, is in every static majoritarian system, there is no opportunity cost between issues. You don't lose anything for participating in an issue that you don't care about. Whereas in issue-based direct democracy, you do. You actively lessen your own ability to change the things you care about if you go and interfere with someone else's business. So we also use specialization in trade. This is for any economists in the room. This is, literally the first and second lecture of your economics course. And comparative advantage, which probably takes a little bit longer to get to, but ties into opportunity cost quite a lot. So this is a long sentence, so we'll go through it slowly. By associating a dynamic political cost to conjecture, which is in this case suggesting new ideas, suggesting new policies, by associating a cost to suggesting new policies, and also by associating a cost to voting against policies, or trying to remove someone else's policy, by creating those opportunity costs, the optimum strategy becomes produce the best policy. Yo.
Sorry, can I jump in? So with same-sex marriage, there's a lot of people who are vehemently against that, and there's a small amount of people that really, really care about it. Would this backfire for them?
So I write a little bit, I've got some quite long essays about the actual various economic cases that can come through here. So this is one where you have, presumably, because the explanations from both sides are mutually exclusive, you either have a situation where one side has a terrible explanation, one side has a good explanation, or where they've both got bad explanations. And the end result of this through our economic system is essentially a war of attrition. Now, the way I sort of personally look at it is that it's going to be about the side that gives up first, essentially, and there's going to be like a long-term tax on both those people, both those groups, for pursuing that issue with such vigor. Now, the way that works out, I mean, I said that this system bias has got an explanation, so I'll let you draw your own conclusions.
Do city-states play a part in what you're putting together? Like, is the idea that maybe if the laws apply to smaller areas and smaller localities, that you could get optimal by people moving to the better policy places?
So, I guess there's a few ways to answer this question. I've thought a lot about the idea of using this for like essentially international politics. Maybe we can talk more about that in the panel. One thing though is, we essentially set each democracy to the jurisdictions that it's hosted in at this point. Everyone within Australia would be able to, by voting in a Flux candidate, would be able to participate in a big sort of ecosystem that incorporates the entirety of Australia. But you've got to be an electorate where you vote in the Flux candidate to participate. In terms of essentially, it's one of the really neat properties about the system is that it scales to whatever size of the population that you want. Now, I suspect that it breaks down at low populations just because of the effort to reward ratio, but once you go over a few thousand people, then I think it'll probably work in any context.
I'm just kind of curious, you've defined this as produce the best policy, and I'm kind of curious more from a mathematical standpoint, this feels more like a definition of an optimum consensus on an issue rather than defining best in some sort of...
So that's quite interesting. I would suggest that pretty much every decision made by issue-based direct democracy does not agree with typical mathematical analysis on the way that consensus works. And in fact, I don't talk about it here, but I think consensus is a really, really, really bad idea. Because you only ever get consensus after it's become so evident that what you're talking about is right, that at the end of the day, if we want to solve problems quickly, we're not going to have consensus. And we don't want consensus because that's a burden. What we do want to do is iterate on different policies to come up with the best policies possible, try them as soon as possible, see what works, see what's refuted, and ultimately try and implement solutions. And waiting for consensus is maybe a bit too slow for that. There's plenty of issues now where there's scientific consensus but not political consensus. Consensus is a loaded term, essentially. Anyway, I'd recommend you look into the beginning of Infinity about that. In terms of best, there is a very precise definition of best. In this case, it means hard to vary. As in, basically, you can't change anything about the policy without breaking it, and provided that you then base it on very specific explanations that are also good in the same way as in, you can't alter them without breaking them, then those things, while they're not true by that merit, we know that they are, as in if you don't have those properties, then that idea is definitely false. And so we've sort of ruled out a whole lot of bad policy by saying, okay, this thing needs to be based on good explanations. Anyway, let's talk more about it later because I'm taking too much time. So, predictions about issue-based direct democracy. So, we get much better policy. We actually get solutions. It's implemented faster when it's good, and it's removed faster when it's bad. The corollaries of these are also true, as in that when you have bad policy, if you want to try and push it through, it becomes slower and more expensive to do so. And removing good policy likewise becomes slower and more expensive. Minorities are empowered with self-determination. So the keyword here, minorities, we're all minorities. As in, I'm a programmer, I do casual economics. I play Magic the Gathering. All of those things are minorities. There's a bunch of majorities I'm involved in, but I don't, it's the issues that I really care about and that drive me have to do with things that only a small percentage of people care about. And I think that that's true for pretty much every issue that we deeply care about, is that we're not getting on board with, 60% of the population to go to a rally, we're getting on board with, maybe 2% of the population. And so everything, I don't just mean, for example, Indigenous Australians or a particular community. I mean everyone in this case. And self-determination is really important when you've got policy that matters to you and other people are screwing it up. And then consistent progress. This is something that can only be achieved through acknowledging, understanding the knowledge creation process and trying to maybe optimize for that is the wrong term, but basically internalizing that and trying to make it work as much as possible. So, implementation. So we have blockchain-based governance via Secure Vote. Secure Vote is a product that my startup makes, essentially. It nicely separates out the voting tech from the political stuff. We've got this idea that's very new. We used to have this, we used to try and stay out of the policy generation side, but we've maybe come up with an idea for how to do decentralized policy generation in what is essentially an open discussion forum, but also an open discussion forum where you don't have trolls because it's too expensive to be a troll, but it's very cheap to be productive. It has to be linked to the economic system of issue-based direct democracy. I don't have any more details now, but it's something to look out for. And the other thing is start lots of parties, run in every election, keep doing that until you start winning. That seems to be the only way for a small party to win. That's what the Greens did for 10 years. That's what we'll do, hopefully, for less than 10 years. So decentralizing democracy and issue-based direct democracy. So this is essentially getting to the summary section. So IBD decentralizes democracy. You may have guessed that from the title. But it doesn't decentralize democracy because we wanted it to. It's an emergent property. And this idea of emergence is, I think, something that's really important. Often we think about what we want in a system, and we go out and we design a system around that. But as I pointed out originally, it's very easy to design a decentralized system of democracy that's quite useless, right? And so the idea of emergence here is really encouraging, because our intuition says that, well, decentralization seems good for a collective decision-making mechanism. And this just fell out. This wasn't something that I wanted in it. It was just that everything that I knew about epistemology and economics and everything else meant that we needed to include everyone and it needed to be decentralized. So, yeah, decentralized democracy for the sake of it is not going to work. You can apply this to anything. Removing corruption for the sake of it is not going to work. We need much, much deeper understanding and explanations. So, summary. We need to engage critically to find solutions, and there is no reason that we should like those solutions. This is, I think, really important because often we get emotionally tied up in this sort of thing, and our identity is tied up in the sort of things that we believe are true. And for me, at least, it was very liberating once I was able to extricate my identity from the explanations and the worldview that I had. And I think that's quite important. So I'd encourage you all to maybe reflect on that a bit. If we're interested in truth and knowledge, then we can't do anything else other than this. Because you don't get to choose what the truth is. The truth was here before and will be here after us. Finding it is the interesting part. And continual progress is possible by a continual progress of creating new knowledge. And so if we want continual progress in our democracy, then we better have that one. New systems of democracy or plans, most of them don't critically engage with the real problems, with a really deep understanding of those problems. So they won't work, and we shouldn't expect them to work. Decentralization, I've said that twice. Just skip over it. So we use new systems of democracy, issue-based direct democracy. It might work. I'm not claiming that it's going to work because it's never been tested. But I have strong reasons to suspect it'll work, and I have strong reasons to believe that most other systems will fail where issue-based direct democracy might not. And because it uses good explanations. So selector theory, economics, basics, fallibilism, all of that sort of stuff, understanding power, all of that goes into it. Not to mention the blockchain stuff on the back end that helps it work. Those things that I just mentioned. And because it embodies the knowledge creation process, which is conjecture and criticism. By the way, so evolution is just conjecture and criticism. Mutation is is conjecture. Death is criticism. It goes on in our own mind where we come up with ideas. We go through this process of thinking of stuff. Sometimes a good one pops out and then we go talk to our friend, and then sometimes they shoot it down, and sometimes they're like, hey, I can't find a hole in this. Conjecture and criticism, they're the two key things in knowledge creation. So, this is the last slide. These are all like the bibliography and the links and things. If you want to take a photo of anything, take a photo of this. The Beginning of Infinity is big and in yellow because that is literally the most important book that I've ever read. And if there is one book that you read in the rest of your life, it should be that one. So please go and have a look into it. It goes through fallibilism, particularly theory of knowledge, that sort of stuff. Anyway, this is some other stuff. Fallibleideas.com, good site. Elliot Temple, Popperian philosopher. There's, Flux links at the bottom, there's my emails, stuff like that. Anyway, so thank you, everyone. By the way, I have to put in a plug. Flux is trying to register a New South Wales party. We need essentially 750 stat decks to do that. So if you're interested in supporting us, that would be really neat. Come talk to us after.
Any questions for Max while Meow sets up? Or sorry, Shane?
Yep. Your second last slide there, you said it might work. You don't know. following on from your popper comments, what are the principles about falsification? Have you thought what could prove wrong, and are you pursuing them?
Yeah, so we have thought a bit about that. One of the questions we get asked is why haven't you tested it? And the answer is because we don't have an appropriate test bed yet. We have several different plans working on different avenues for how to test it. But essentially, if we're using a system that's based on economic principles, we can't use play money here type thing. We can't use play issues. We need things that actually matter to people, because the properties only emerge when people feel that they need to creatively engage and need to really consider how they spend their resources. And if they don't do that, then all we have is this random protocol that just fires noise. And it's only when we really get that deep interaction that we can see those properties emerge. How are we doing on time, Peter, by the way? I don't know.
It's fine.
Okay, cool. Should we go back?
You need to go to the toilet, go to the toilet.
Yeah,
go to the beer, grab a beer.
Grab a beer on next and make sure.
James, don't want to miss me out.
Could you use this model for businesses? Could you run a business under this model and then test it on that? Does it need to be a political system?
Okay, so the question is, can you use this for decision making in a company? Maybe it depends on the company. One of the crucial things here is opportunity cost between issues. And what that means is that if you don't have an ecosystem of issues, then it'll just basically be a normal democracy. And there's no reason to suspect that it'll be better than a normal decision-making process. If you had something like General Electric, where they have just a massive panoply of products, it might work, but the problem with companies that make lots and lots of different diverse things is they're also incredibly valuable, so they're probably not, knocking on the door to try and change all the decision
You
making.
can have big four consultancies who have individual businesses inside of them competing for making the company more money.
So that's possible. It would be interesting to sort of use an economic test case to look at. One of the other things is this has to be enduring. As in, this doesn't work over one issue. It works a little bit, but on the long term, to maximize specialization and output, we need it to be an enduring thing. So that sort of becomes a bit difficult there as well. But we can talk about it more at the panel if you like.
Have you looked into much about economic theory around World of Warcraft? Because
as in the hyperinflation of gold and stuff like that.
yes, because what you're talking about and the question about could you do this in business in real world, as you just said, that probably wouldn't work. But in a fake world like that, with competing interests and ideas and people feel very strongly, because those, cave dwellers actually care about that shit. World of Warcraft's fake, but it actually might be the right test bed with all the things you talked about.
It'd be an interesting test bed, and I think it would actually probably work. I was actually thinking about this a little while ago, but I think we have systems that are lower friction to implement it in, essentially to start with, so we're not focusing on that, but I think it would work.
Just like OpenAI and StarCraft, and also it seems like a really interesting place.
Yeah, particularly you need something like World of Warcraft where you have a persistent universe, and you have an ongoing thing that people are connected with for months or years.
Elite Dangerous or...
exactly, something like that. Elite Dangerous or EVE Online, yeah, exactly. That would be a very interesting case. I'm not sure if we can convince them, but and writing our own game is probably a bit too much overhead. But no, that's definitely something that we're interested in.
So, in the model of I'm thinking about something that's important to me. Things become more important to me the more I see things swinging the other way.
Yes.
So, how do you kind of scale that of people are as long as they think they're winning, they don't feel like they need to.
So I guess so the question is essentially you put more effort in when you're losing, sort of thing. The way that our system works is so I'll just go really high level economics quite quick. We have two kinds of tokens, right? Voting tokens and liquidity tokens. Voting tokens are instantiated, there's a particular type of voting token made each time there's a new issue, and they're specific to that issue. There's only one type of liquidity token, and all voting tokens can be traded for liquidity tokens on the market, and vice versa. Right? When the process of acquiring these voting tokens goes on during the last stages of, and this is the current construction, this might change, goes on during the last stages of the ballot on whether this thing should pass or not. And you do this by bidding on a specially crafted auction system that basically seeks to maximize the amount of information present and also discourage people from sniping auctions, sort of thing, for example. So the idea is to have high, accurate, consistent information throughout this auction. When you make a bid, you have to declare which way your vote goes. And so you can't actually attempt to acquire votes without declaring how you're going to use them. And basically through making as much information as accessible as possible, which in terms of economic theory increases the ability to find prices. This is basically the way that we enable people to act on that level of information and to know how things are going on, and then they have a way, a method, a chance to act in opposition if it's not going the right way. The corollary to this is that if we didn't have good price finding, then often people in these situations or political organizations that want a particular outcome might overspend. They might spend too much liquidity tokens and then end up winning the vote by 25%, which is useless because obviously they had to buy more buy more of the voting tokens in that regard than they would have otherwise. And of course, I just want to mention, I'm using words like buy and sell and stuff. There's no cash involved in this. We cut off the cash economy without very, very significant effort by basically disabling, there's no send function. You can't send voting tokens to anyone, you can't send liquidity tokens to anyone. You can only use them through the auction system or by voting. And so it becomes, and because of our anonymization technology, it becomes very difficult to actually prove one way or the other. So basically you can't use cash to influence things. So the corollary being that we want the markets to be as efficient as possible because people don't waste resources that way. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. We can talk more later if that's okay.
Is there a total amount of, a static total amount of tokens within the system?
This is an interesting question. Is there a static total amount of tokens? No. In fact, we use something that I don't know if it's ever been experimented with before. We have constant high inflation on the liquidity tokens. So I'm thinking about 30% a year is good. Now, the reason for this is that it pushes, basically we create, say at the end of every year we create 30% extra tokens based on the supply, liquidity tokens. We then redistribute this evenly across all voters, universal basic income style, as we'll hear in a moment, which I should probably, go sit down pretty soon. What we do then, though, is to avoid people losing the ability to intuit prices, is that we denominate everything in terms of percentage of the whole, not in terms of units. And so you have one liquidity token maybe, but that's 0.01 points sort of thing is in percentage points, and all the prices are denominated in points. And so they're always relative to the total. Now that means that your balance will change over time just from using it or not using it, but the ability to ensure prices remains and is maintained in that property. Anyway, any more questions we'll talk about on the panel. I really need to sit down, so.